They told us they'd never speak again. They told us the chapter was closed for good. And yet, last night, Niall Horan did something that no one, and I mean absolutely no one, saw coming. He walked straight into Zayn Malik's private recording studio in Los Angeles, unannounced at an hour when most of Hollywood is already asleep. And the reason why has sent shockwaves through the music industry for a very different set of reasons than you're probably imagining. Now, I've been following these guys since the early days when they were just five lads sitting on stools singing their hearts out on a certain British talent show, and I can tell you that what I'm about to share isn't some recycled tabloid gossip. According to multiple eyewitness accounts and a production assistant who was inside the building, Niall didn't just pop in to say hello. He arrived carrying a weathered leather notebook and a vintage guitar case that, if my sources are correct, actually belonged to someone else entirely, someone who connects their past in a way even the most dedicated directioners might have missed. But before we get to that, you need to understand the sheer weight of this moment, because the last time these two were photographed together willingly was nearly a decade ago, and the silence between them since Zayn's departure from One Direction has been so loud that even casual fans assumed a reunion of any kind was about as likely as a snowstorm in the Sahara. We've seen the frosty interviews, the carefully worded non-answers, and the cryptic tweets that the internet dissected for days. We remember when Niall awkwardly dodged a Zayn question on a radio show and the entire fandom melted down. So, to go from that level of distance to an unscheduled late-night studio meeting that nobody saw coming, it doesn't just raise eyebrows, it demands an explanation. Here's what we know for a fact, pieced together from multiple reports that all corroborate the same timeline. Zayn has been holed up in that same studio complex for the better part of 3 months, working on what insiders describe as his most personal project since going solo. Security around the building was tighter than usual, with non-disclosure agreements signed by everyone from sound engineers to the person who delivered the coffee. Niall, meanwhile, had just wrapped a string of headline shows, and by all appearances was supposed to be decompressing far away from the chaos of the industry. He was spotted at the airport less than 24 hours earlier looking relaxed, and yet somehow he ended up on Zayn's doorstep with a sense of urgency that those present say was palpable. The door opened, they exchanged a look that one source described as a whole conversation in 2 seconds, and then the door closed behind them for nearly 4 hours. During that time, faint acoustic guitar could be heard through the soundproofed walls, along with occasional laughter and what one person described as a long, heavy silence that felt more like a necessary exhale than anything awkward. Now, I know you're already building theories in your head, and I promise you the real reason is juicier and more meaningful than a simple catch-up. To truly grasp the magnitude, we have to rewind and look at the breadcrumb trail that most people dismissed as random internet noise. About 6 months ago, both Zayn's mother and Niall's mother started following each other on social media, a tiny digital move that flew under the radar, but in hindsight feels like the first domino. Around the same time, Niall gave an interview where he said, unprompted, that he's always been proud of what all 5 of them built together, and that he believes people can grow and reconnect when the time is right. He didn't name Zayn, but the implication hung in the air like an uninvited guest. Then, more recently, an eagle-eyed fan noticed that Zayn had liked a post from Niall's official account, something he hasn't done since 2015. These aren't coincidences, they're soft signals, and they were clearly building toward a moment that needed a catalyst. That catalyst, according to a music journalist who has been quietly tracking Zayn's creative resurgence, is a deeply emotional track that Zayn had been struggling to finish because it required a voice and a presence that isn't just any featured artist. It needed someone who lived the same origin story, who understands the madness of that rocket ship fame from the inside, and who could bring the kind of raw honesty the song demanded. And here's the part that gave me chills when I first heard it. Niall didn't just hop on a track, he flew across the country carrying a specific artifact, a Martin guitar that a mutual mentor gave them during the Up All Night era, a guitar that hasn't been seen publicly in years, and that according to the instrument's documented history, actually belonged to someone else entirely, someone who connects their past in a way even the most dedicated directioners might have missed. But before we get to that, this story doesn't end with an emotional emotional hug and a few chords strummed for old time's sake. The very next morning, a van from a major streaming platform was parked outside the same building, and a three-person camera crew was seen unloading equipment under the supervision of a producer whose previous credits include some of the most talked-about music documentaries of the last 5 years. Now, I have to be careful here because nothing has been officially announced, and all of this comes from visual confirmation by several bystanders who are familiar with production setups. But if you connect those dots, it suggests that the studio session wasn't just for an album cut, it was being documented. Imagine the implications. After years of fans begging for even a hint of communication, we might be on the verge of seeing the entire creative and emotional journey between Niall and Zayn captured in high definition, raw and unfiltered. That alone is a bombshell, yet it still doesn't fully explain why now, why this specific week. This is where the story takes a turn that I personally find incredibly moving, and that, according to a source close to the former One Direction camp, has to do with a private promise made months ago. Following a tragedy that shook the entire One Direction family and left millions of hearts broken around the world, several of the guys reportedly made a quiet pact to stop letting time and ego stand in the way of meaningful connection. I won't go down a sad road here because that's not what this moment is about, but it's important context because it reframes everything. This visit didn't happen out of nowhere. It happened because two people who once knew each other better than anyone decided that life is too short for grudges and that the best way to honor something bigger than themselves was to create together again. And look, as a longtime observer of pop culture, I've seen my fair share of staged reunions designed to boost streaming numbers, but the tiny details leaking out from that night don't smell manufactured. The notebook Niall brought? Insiders say it contained handwritten lyrics, some of which were originally drafted years ago, during a time when the group was at a crossroads. Lyrics that Zayn reportedly read and then quietly added his own verse to without saying a word. The song, I'm told, is structured like a conversation, a back and forth that acknowledges mistakes, celebrates growth, and leaves the door open for a future that none of us has a map for. Is it going to be a single, an album centerpiece, the climactic scene of a documentary that might just break the internet? At this point, the only people who know for sure are sitting behind a mixing board in a studio that's now under even heavier lock and key. But let me offer you a theory that I've pieced together from a legal filing I managed to get eyes on. Nothing confidential, just publicly available copyright registration activity. In the last month, there's been a flurry of activity around a composition registered under a pseudonym that music publishing experts I've spoken to believe connects to both Niall's and Zayn's respective catalogs. The song title hasn't been revealed, but the registration lists a co-writer that one insider cryptically identified as someone who bridges the gap between then and now. And if you think that's just industry mumbo-jumbo, consider this. Niall recently said in an interview that he's been writing some of the most honest music of his life with people he never thought he'd be in a room with again. He said it with a smile that suggested he was holding back a secret the size of a stadium. I'll be honest with you, I'm not a fan of hype for hype's sake, and I never want to mislead anyone, so I have to emphasize that no official announcement has been made, no release date has been whispered, and we could be months away from hearing the finished product, but the signals are too loud to ignore, and if even half of what's been reported by credible sources turns out to be true, we're looking at a cultural moment that will redefine how we view the post-boy band journey. It's not just about music, it's about the human capacity to mend what seemed irreparable. Niall walking through that door wasn't just a pop star dropping by a colleague's session, it was an act of friendship that had been building quietly for months, a long overdue face-to-face to turn an apology into harmony, literally. They needed to be in the same room with no cameras rolling initially, despite what came later, just two guys with a complicated past, a shared grief, and a mutual realization that the best art they've ever made was when they were listening to each other. The documentary, if the reports are accurate, came afterwards because someone smart recognized that this was a story too beautiful to keep locked inside a hard drive. And I'll leave you with one final detail that has me checking my phone every hour for updates. According to the production assistant I mentioned earlier, as Niall was leaving the studio that night, he turned back to Zayn and said something that made both of them laugh and shake their heads in disbelief. The assistant couldn't catch every word, but three were loud enough to cut through the LA night air. Same time tomorrow.
That's not an ending, that's a beginning, and if that doesn't make you want to subscribe and hit that bell for whatever comes next, I genuinely don't know what will. I'm not saying we're getting a One Direction reunion next week. I'd be the first to tell you to calm down, but I am saying that the wall between Niall Horan and Zayn Malik has not only crumbled, it's been replaced by a studio door that keeps swinging open, and the music they make behind it might just be the soundtrack of a healing nobody saw coming. Let me know in the comments what you think is really happening, because I have a feeling this story is going to evolve faster than any of us can refresh our feeds.